Okay, shall we start then? Thanks everyone for being here. An important meeting because we take decisions on the review of last year's accounts and the annual government statement, which is one of the sort of key decision points this year. And we'll go into the timetable and what's happened for that item. Right, starting off then with apologies for absence.
With apologies from Councillor Gregory.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Good. Okay, moving on then to the minutes of previous meeting.
Councillor Sharman, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
I've just had a message from Councillor Lynch to say that she's running 10 minutes late.
Fine, thanks for that. Okay, well, it's no problem. We've got a quorum, so we're okay. Okay, for the minutes of the previous meeting, any queries about accuracy? Any matters arising? There are a couple of action points, which I think, Ian, both for you and both on the agenda. So I think we're fine on that. So if no one's got any other matters arising, let's move on to the main purpose of tonight's meeting, which is the financial statements and annual government's report. So Ian, do you want to take us through that, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. Hope you all had a good summer break. So yes, absolutely. This evening, one of the highlights of the finance calendar in terms of decisions that come to committees, and in particular Audit Committee. So tonight, before you've got our set of accounts, which have been produced in unprecedented circumstances and audited in unprecedented circumstances. So I'm really pleased to have them here tonight. You know, not many boroughs have got to this stage in the audit or in the preparation of their accounts going to committee. So I'm particularly pleased with the work of Michael Honeysett, James Newman, and all the finance teams who've done a fantastic job getting us to this place. And also they've worked very closely and in great partnership with Lucy and Stuart and the Mazars team, which again has been something which has been very encouraging and isn't the case in all local authorities from the discussions I've been party to as well. Obviously there's a lot in the documents that are here. Hopefully members have had a chance to look at them, and also the report that's been prepared by the Mazars team. Michael's going to give us a quick overview of the accounts, and then we'll hand over to Lucy to go through her management report, and then we'll open up for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Michael, you
bear with me, right?
Yeah.
There we go.
So are you going to launch it on as a statement, or so you're going to do a verbal report at this stage?
I can do a verbal report. Well, I've got obviously I've got the cover report which just summarises the main points in the actual statement of accounts, which is what I was going to go through.
Great, go ahead.
Although, sorry, no, it's okay. I thought Lucy was going first, but but maybe not. I'll kick off the actual statement of accounts then. So in highlights, obviously in recent years, the accounts and audit regulations have required that we've actually completed and produced a draft accounts by the 31st of May. But because of all the issues around COVID, etc., for 1920, the deadline was actually pushed back to the 31st of August for us to prepare accounts. I'm happy to say that we still produced our accounts by middle of June, and that those draft accounts were published in middle of June. And the deadline for actually getting the accounts approved by audit, so the audit opinion, is now 30th of November. Obviously, hopefully following this meeting, the actual certificate will follow soon after, and I'm hopeful we'll get one by the end of September, hopefully. As I've said in the cover report, we are at this stage anticipating another unqualified audit opinion. Obviously, the statement of accounts itself, which is at Appendix 1, is a huge document, so I'm not actually going to go through that page by page. I said the report here just covers the main points, which I'll pull out now. So from the the main statements themselves, the movement in reserve statement really show that on the general fund, we've maintained the balance at 15 million for the unearmarked general fund balance. And whilst the HRA general balance has actually reduced back to the 11.2 million from the 15 that we had previous year, that does also have further reserves of just over 5 million linked to the HRA. So that's still in good shape. Locally managed schools that are held by the funds, by the schools, which obviously the council have no direct control over. They are locally managed by the schools. Their balance is reduced during the year by 1.76 million to 13 million, just over 13 million. And the movement in reserve statement basically shows we applied a net of 11.6 million of earmarked reserves to the general fund. So that was in respect of many things that we had anticipated in respect of some of the ongoing pressures through the budget, obviously financing of the capital programme and things like that. And then through resources available, being able to actually top those reserves back up to where we think sensible for those that needed it. So, for example, the insurance reserve and things like that. So the full details of the movement in earmarked reserves, there's quite a detailed note in the accounts. It's note 8. And that shows the description and the movement and the balance of each of those going forward into the next financial year. The comprehensive income and expenditure account itself, again, is obviously one of the main statements which sets out the actual expenditure of the council across the services that it's provided. The bottom line on the general fund is that in 1920 we in the final accounts we had a 9.3 million overspend, although that was covered from one-off collection fund surplus from previous year and other one-off grants that we've actually received throughout the year, and that was as largely as reported in the OFP that how we was going to deal with that. Of course, the impact of COVID didn't really start feeding through in these accounts in terms of the actual expenditure, because the lockdown obviously came towards the very end of the year. But we did also implement the savings necessary for the 2019-20 financial year to actually help balance that year off. In terms of the balance sheet itself, the council, it shows that we've got a net assets of over £3.5 billion. Now, clearly, the major element of the balance sheet for the council is its building, land and property, which is actually valued at just over nearly £4.25 million, actually, £1 billion. So one of the huge assets, and it's obviously one of the major aspects of the audit emphasis because of that sheer value in the accounts. The balance sheet also sets out details, and the notes behind them in the main appendix show items where we've set provisions aside for known liabilities going forward. And there's also details of contingent assets and liabilities, which are set out in notes 45 and 46 of the appendix. And those are really where we know there might be an asset or liability going forward, but we're not certain of the value of it yet or of its actual timing. But we've obviously been as transparent as we can in actually putting those in the accounts in terms of disclosing them. Now, as I said earlier, COVID-19, obviously, we haven't presented that as contingent liability, but there is a huge amount of detail in the narrative forward about COVID-19 and the impact on the finances going forward. So I think, looking at the accounts that I've seen across many authorities, I think we've been given one of the most comprehensive outlines of how we think COVID-19 is impacting into the current financial year now. So that's the balance sheet. Some of the other accounts are obviously the housing revenue accounts, which is details of income and expenditure which relate to the management and provision of housing, the council dwellings. As I've said earlier, that shows that the housing revenue account has an ongoing unearmarked balance of 11.2 million. And then there's earmarked reserves of 5.9 million, which is largely linked to items of expenditure to do with the capital programme, the regen, etc. The collection fund account, which is where we account for our council tax and business rates, and our dealings with the GLA, etc., in terms of their shares of both of those, showed that we actually had a council tax surplus for 2019-20 of 2.7 million. In our budget, the way the budget surplus coming from the county collection fund actually impacts on the next year's budget. So in this current year's budget, we actually estimated that we would have 3.1 million surplus. So the estimate wasn't too far away, and the difference in those will just be accounted for in the next year's budget. That's how it works on a rolling basis. In terms of the business rates collection fund balance, we estimated a deficit of 692,000, and we ended up with a deficit of 687 on the business rates for that year. So pretty much on target in terms of the budget setting. So I think both of those are quite sound. It shows that we've got a quite sound basis for our estimation of the collection fund, and therefore the ongoing impact on our budget and finances. The other large part of the accounts is the pension fund accounts, which aren't, obviously they are separate to the council's accounts, but they have to be approved alongside them. They will be considered by Pensions Committee in September, later in September. However, they don't actually approve them. It is Audit Committee that approve them as part of this process. Basically, the accounts of the pension fund accounts show that the net assets of the pension fund lie at just below 1.5 billion. That's a reduction of about 82 million. Largest part of that is due to the impact of reductions on the value of the stock markets. Obviously, COVID hit the stock markets very quick, particularly when the lockdown was announced, and that's obviously shown through in that investment value. Whilst it's not mentioned in this report, since then that valuation, the stock market's picked up, and the pension fund net assets have also pretty much to around about where we started before COVID. But obviously they're very volatile to the situation at the moment. The one new area in the statement of accounts this year is the group accounts. Obviously, we've got a number of subsidiary companies, particularly for housing, regen, and a couple for some of our mixed-use development, the management of the residences above. And we've grouped two, correct me if I'm wrong, James, 2 or 3, is it, of those companies?
Two
of them this year, on the basis that one of them wasn't actually running by year end, and the other 2 have quite an immaterial impact, so they haven't been grouped, but they are mentioned in the accounts. So that's a new section which obviously presents additional work for both us and the audit indeed. So alongside the main statement, the other part of the other thing that you're asked to approve tonight alongside the actual accounts is the annual government statement, and that has to be approved by Audit Committee in its own right, not just as part of the accounts as it is presented. Now that statement is basically explains how the council complied with its own local code of governance, and how it meets the requirements of the accounts and audit regulations in terms of the publication of its statement of internal control. The statement sets out obviously how we've done those things, but it also updates on the 4 significant issues that were identified in 2018-19 and how they've been addressed during 2019-20. And additionally, it picks up on 4 significant, what has been recognised as 4 significant governance issues going forward. which have been included in the corporate governance statement. And those issues relate to, not surprisingly, COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of that. Cost pressures, ongoing cost pressures within adult and children's services. Issues relating to the Ofsted inspection during the year, and obviously need to address that, and housing contract management. As I say, I'm not going to go into any more detail in terms of the actual accounts, but obviously happy to take questions. Sorry, Chair, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very helpful. Any questions that members have got from Michael's summary? Yeah, Claire, go ahead.
On page 9 and point 6, when you talk of the FRC review of the 2018-19 audit work, you mentioned that there were 4 specific areas highlighted where the financial statements of audit were deemed not to have been to the required standard in terms of the audit file evidence, valuation of pension fund assets, capital grants, and completeness of expenditure. I think it goes on to say that Mazars have confirmed that this doesn't have any significant impact on the authority's accounts, and that they believe that these issues have been addressed during 2019-20. I just wondered if you could give a little bit of more detail about this, about why those have been, how those have been kind of satisfactorily addressed, because it doesn't go into that detail in the report.
Yeah, I think that's probably because that was, as it says in the report, that FRC report is more in respect to the actual audit work. So I think it'd be better for Lucy from Mazars to answer that question, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Happy to take that. Yeah, thank you for the question. So it was a very detailed. It is of the audit file. It's and of the audit. You know, it's no kind of indictment on the financial statements or the working papers we received from the council. The work on valuation of property, plant and equipment, land and buildings, essentially. The FRC set out a very detailed schedule of where they didn't think we've done enough work. We've turned that schedule. We've made sure that all of those comments are included in our audit programs, so that everything they've recognised that they didn't think we've done terribly well, that has been taken in this year. In terms of capital grants and completeness of expenditure, much the same thing. They identified where they thought we hadn't done enough work. We've made sure that's incorporated into work that we do this year. The valuation of pension fund assets was purely that myself as the auditor of the authority and the auditor of the pension fund, I did not write myself a clear enough letter to say that the work I'd done on the pension fund was sufficient for the work for the authority. So I've written myself a very long letter this year to make sure I've covered all those bases. But we have essentially, we've taken everything the FRC have said and we've tracked against it to make sure we can demonstrate to them what we've done against that. Is that?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. I mean, just to add to that, obviously both Ian and myself were very concerned that the issues that the FRC had identified, were taken up in the way Lucy's described, and secondly, that this year's accounts could not be qualified in the same way. And I think we're both, well, I'm certainly been reassured that that is the case. And Ian, it'd be worth you just adding to that point as direct.
Yeah, more than happy to do that, Chair. I think it's worth them just reflecting also on what the FRC do, the Financial Reporting Council, and I'm sure members of the committee have seen extensive coverage in the press of over the last year, things from Patisserie Valerie through to various other companies' audits that haven't been done satisfactorily. Now, it's a fact that, and in part, it's addressed in a way in some of the findings in the Redmond review about the organisation of local authority audit, but the extent to which, we've talked about it here many times, haven't we? Property, plant and equipment. Michael's outlined the council's got assets that are approaching £5 billion, but those aren't assets that we can ever leverage any debt against, in terms of we're not like a company and borrow against those assets. But unfortunately, the auditors have got to provide evidence and have got to effectively undertake visits, actual in-person visits, to check that School X, which is on our asset register, is actually there. And that some of that documentation is what actually the FRC, when they did the review of the Mazars file, they felt wasn't done satisfactorily. I think it is just a reflection of the imbalance sometimes between public and private.
Great.
I'm satisfied about what's been proposed.
Yeah. Any are you happy, Claire?
Yes, yeah, I am. That's a
It's a very good point. It was obviously something that we really concerned with. Okay, any other points on Michael's report that colleagues want to raise? Okay, thanks very much, Michael. Let's go on then, Ian. I take it that, well, how do you want to take it? Do you want to get Lucy to go through her report at this?
I think that would be great, yes, if that's possible, Chair, and then we can return to do the recommendations.
Yeah, because I mean, I think the annual governance statement comes, also I'd want to be clear about what we were saying on the annual government statement as a distinct issue. Okay, Lucy, please go through what your view of what Michael's been telling us has been going on.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, I'd like to echo and return the comments of Ian and Michael in their paper and in their speaking, to record my thanks to the finance team and what has been a very different audit. The entire audit has been conducted remotely, although, as Ian mentioned, we do need to go and visit the schools in person. So someone will be trailing around Hackney in the coming days to make sure all your schools are still standing. So we've had to deal with, as well as working remotely, we've had to deal with a lot of technical issues that have arisen as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. I'm going to propose that I take you through the local authority report first, then pause for any questions on that, and then I'll go through the pension fund report as well, if that's okay, Chair. In both reports, I do have to say that the list of outstanding items is far longer than I'm sure you're used to seeing and that I'm used to presenting, but given the situation we're in, it's fairly common across the sector, and you'll be aware that the deadline has been extended to the 30th November, and most authorities are taking advantage of that. So page 3 of the report, which I think is page 8, sorry, of your pack, it shows the key message, and the key message I suppose for you to take away is that the proposed opinion on the accounts is unqualified, but does include an emphasis of matter, in that this isn't a modification of opinion, and it's around the land and building valuations, which I'll come back to when I talk through the risks. The value for money conclusion we also propose to be unqualified. A whole of government accounts instructions haven't yet been issued by the NAO, but when they are, the work will be done relatively quickly, and we've had no objections to the 1920 accounts. So the outstanding matters are set out on the next page of the report, and given the significance of these outstanding items and the fact that most of them do link to a significant risk, I've agreed with the finance team this afternoon that we will reissue this report as a final version, just when we're close to signing, so we'll issue that by email to you all in advance of us signing the accounts. I don't really propose to go through these in detail now, but I'll pick up on them as I go through the significant risks. So the significant risks, and that isn't like the risk register that we talk about at every audit committee. This is the auditor's significant risk of material misstatement. It's slightly different. So the first one is a presumed risk of management override of controls. It's not to say that we think that Ian and Michael are overriding the controls. We, as auditors, we have to presume that they are. So we do a lot of work around estimates, around journal entries, to make sure. that there hasn't been manipulation of accounting records. Our work on journal entries isn't quite complete yet, so we can't fully conclude, but we haven't identified anything from the work we've done to date. The second significant risk, and it's another presumed risk, is around fraud and error in revenue recognition. Again, we've got work outstanding on income and debtors, so we can't fully conclude at this point, but there have been no issues identified from the work we've done to date. Now we get onto land and building valuations. I had to stop calling it PPE because it really confused people in April when I was talking about PPE valuations. So around the land and buildings, Nazine and Michael have said, you know, it is such a huge balance. And so we do a huge amount of work on that. Work is ongoing, but to run you through the two issues that we have encountered to date. So the first one is that the valuer updated the valuation report to include a material valuation uncertainty paragraph, just due to the impact of the pandemic, and that's in line with guidance that's been issued by RICS and in common with most other local authorities and certainly all the NHS trusts that I signed off this year. So that uncertainty that the valuer has set out is reflected by management in note 4 to the accounts, and that is then reflected in our audit report as an emphasis of matter. And to repeat, it's not a modification of opinion, it's essentially a bookmark for the reader because it's something management have drawn attention to, so we draw attention to it as well. And I do expect to see that on most local authority accounts this year. The second issue on the work we've done on property, plant and equipment was that audit testing identified that an incorrect index rate had been used for a number of depreciated replacement cost valuations that caused the balance to be materially misstated. And further on in the report, you'll see quite a significant journal to correct that. The council have accepted the error and the accounts have been updated to reflect that. However, it was identified this afternoon that the journal in the audit completion report is slightly incorrect and it should total 40.1 million, not 39.2, and that the full movement hadn't gone through the accounts, the version of the accounts that you have in front of you. So there's a movement at the bottom of the CIES that hadn't been fully worked through. So that will be updated. I think it has actually been updated this afternoon. So we need to work through all of those to make sure we're content with them. But as I say, the work on PPE is ongoing at this point. The final significant risk we identified was that of the defined benefit liability valuation, the pension liability. The work is ongoing here. We await assurances from myself as pension fund auditor, and you'll see the pension fund completion report has a number of things outstanding, and also from Grant Thornton because the council has a material share of LPFA. We do expect that relatively quickly, but then when we get that, we need to work through any reporting implications arising from that. It may be that there is an emphasis of matter on the LPFA, and then we just need to work that through to see whether that has an impact on the council's accounts. So that's the significant risks. We also raised an enhanced risk around the management judgment, a significant area of management judgment being the NNDR appeals provision, which increased quite significantly last year, but we've worked on that and we're content with the use of the provision and movement in year. If we jump on to what I have as page 19, and that's the 2 internal control recommendations that we've raised. We raised a recommendation around the review of the index rates used for DRC valuations, essentially because it needed such a big adjustment. And we've also raised a recommendation on the use of suspense accounts. And to be very clear, we don't think the bank figure in the accounts is incorrect. It's just there was a balance in a suspense account that was just a bit high for our liking, but we do recognise that the council are aware of it and have been working on reducing it from the value that we've stated in our report. That summarises work on the financial statements to date. In terms of our value for money work, and it's the last time you'll see us reporting like this. So there's a new code of audit practice that comes out, and we're required to look at different things from next year. Overall, a clean conclusion, and I think that coronavirus has taken over our lives to such an extent that it's really difficult to remember what life was like before COVID. But that's really what we've had to do in terms of this value for money conclusion, because COVID really only had a substantive impact on the council's operations, governance and finances in the last 2 weeks of the 19-20 year. So while we have considered your overall response to the pandemic, and clearly we're looking at how you're going to reset the MTFS and the capital plan going forward to kind of breach the savings gap that's in future presentations, it hasn't really featured heavily in our conclusion, because there's nothing that has happened that has alarmed us in this period, and we can see the trajectory, we can see where you're going in terms of an MTFS, which hasn't caused me to think that there's a problem with giving you a clean conclusion for 19-20. Finally, I will pause, I promise. Appendix A and Appendix B have the draft audit report and the draft letter of representation that we ask Ian to sign just round about the time that we're going to sign the accounts, which essentially confirms that he's told us everything that he needs to tell us. I think as well, if I can probably just set out the next steps. I think audit work continuing to complete the items we've marked as outstanding. The LPFA assurance, we need to work through the implications of their opinion for our opinion. The updated accounts need to go through a second stage technical review at Mazar, which is scheduled to happen fairly quickly. All audit work remains subject to ongoing review by myself and the engagement quality control reviewer. And as I said earlier, when all this is done, I will look to reissue this audit completion report out with committee, with all the outstanding items taken off, with the correct journal for the adjustment, and for any other changes we've had to make. So I feel like I've talked for quite a long time. I'm more than happy to take any questions you might have on the authority audit completion report.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Just before we get into a discussion, just so that I'm clear, Ian, Lucy's made a number of points about uncertainties. Now, I'm assuming those are all loose ends. In other words, they're finalising things. In other words, we have got the substantive in front of us. It enables us to make an in-principle decision subject to getting those final works done. So
absolutely, we wouldn't have brought them.
They can take a decision tonight, reassured that there aren't some lurking substantive issues.
No. It is just really loose ends, as you've described.
Okay, very helpful. Right, colleagues, any questions to Lucy about her report? No, it's my dog.
I haven't got a question, Chair. I just wanted to apologise for my lateness and say that for a change, that isn't my dog barking. I do feel for whoever it is barking, because I know the pain. Oh, no, he started.
Anyway, welcome out.
Thank you. I apologise. I've been here a bit longer than I came a bit earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt. But thank you, Lucy, for your report.
Right. Any colleagues got any questions to Lucy? I mean, I guess the issue for me was the internal controls issues and the strengthening that you feel that we have got in place. Issues that or management arrangements that you think will address that. The second issue that I wanted to raise was the value for money point, and to me this is so crucial now. The whole idea of this council being a going concern is part of what we're saying at the moment. You can only say not the substance, but that we've got the process in place which can address those issues. And I think that's the point that Mike was making earlier about the long narrative we've got in here about how we've reacted to it, and the process that we are conducting with Rebecca and colleagues in scrutiny to look at ways to adjust and think about the development of the MTFS, to me, is reassuring that we have got in place what is absolutely key going forward. And I think we'll find a number of councils really struggling with this issue about value for money. Good. Okay. I'm not hearing any questions or added points. So with that, do you want to add anything, Ian, before we take a decision on approving the accounts, which will be an approval subject to getting the finance?
Sorry, sir, we've still got the pension fund audit completion report to go through.
Ah, sorry. Yep. Good
Sorry,
point. Okay, let's do that. Yeah.
Get your money for money out of me tonight.
Yeah.
So pension fund, very similar format to the authority report. So I will whiz through it fairly quickly. We do envisage an unqualified opinion, and we will issue a consistency report on the pension fund accounts in the pension fund annual report when that is ready. That has a bit of a later deadline, the end of November, as memory serves. As with the council audit, there are a number of outstanding items which we have listed out, and the investment confirmation is quite significant because we've requested an updated valuation for the property fund that the council, that the pension fund has invested in, just to be clear whether that has a material valuation uncertainty applied to it. It's the same premise as we've just talked about for the council. If that is the case, if the fund manager has applied that material valuation uncertainty, that will then need to be reflected in the pension fund opinion as an emphasis of matter. I didn't include it in the draft opinion because we didn't know, so that may be a change when you get the final audit completion report, but I'll make sure that's signposted. In terms of the significant risks, again, we had the presumed risk of management override. Work is ongoing, but nothing identified to date. And the other significant risk we identified was the valuation of level 3 investments, and level 3 are the investments that are more difficult to value. And there was a big swing in the value of level 3 investments held by the pension fund this year. That was partly through additional investments that the pension fund made at the start of the year, but then that property fund that I was just talking about has been reclassified by the pension fund as level 3, given the inherent uncertainties in valuing property as at the 31st of March due to COVID, and we're content with that reclassification. So there is quite a shift in that number when you look through the accounts. No misstatements or control recommendations to report on the pension fund, and as with the council, work is ongoing and aim to be completed as soon as possible.
Great, thanks very much. Again, any questions on the pension fund? I mean, I take it that Ian, we will get when we need to draw this attention to the point Lewis has made to the pension committee, which you'll do, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Will the pensions committee consider this before we are signing off the report?
Pensions committee will see this at the end of September, so on 28th September.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, but they're not required to approve it, but obviously it will all be brought to their attention because they are the trustees for the fund. So. Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, actually, this. I mean, it'd be nice to hear what they say, but there's no direct intervention. It was based on Lucy's advice. And us having carried out those extra checks, we can sign these accounts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. Right. So we move to a decision on approving the last year's accounts? Can I have, well, I propose that we do, subject, as we've said, to this final report, which I take it I can sign myself on the basis of
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
decision, having obviously reviewed what's been said.
Okay.
Great. All right. Peter, your advice, do we need a recorded vote, or are some hands sufficient?
I think hands are sufficient, Chair.
Right. Okay, colleagues, can I get a vote in favour of that? Right, and that is unanimous. Great. Thanks very much. Well, and just finally, can I add my thanks both to the team, our finance team, and to Lucy and her colleagues. It really is quite an achievement to not only get it in time, and we've heard that there are still councils, as I understand it, who haven't finalised their 18-19 accounts, never mind the 1920 accounts. So this to do it on time, just with a very small extension, is a remarkable achievement. And I think it's an achievement not only of the individual teams working under COVID pressure, it's also a testament to how well they work together. And I've been really delighted about that. So just to add my thanks to others who've and I'd like that certainly conveyed to Ian and Lucy, to your colleagues, and say that
Yes, no, we will do that, certainly, Chair.
Great. Okay, let's move on to consider the annual government statement. Ian, do you want to add to, well, summarise it and just obviously add?
I think we've got Tracy on the line. Tracy, do you want to give a quick overview? Or Michael Sheffield?
Tracy's on the line, but either she's lost her.
Sorry, yeah, I lost the connection there. What was it you wanted to give a quick overview on, Ian? Sorry.
Oh, we're now moving on to make the decision on the annual governance statements. It was just to, is there anything to draw members' attention to? I know we did have a look at this at our meeting in Grief, wasn't it? June, I think, wasn't it? We saw the draft version of it. Has anything materially changed since then, or?
No, nothing's changed. The only thing we did was add in the bit that Councillor Sharman asked us to add in, the extra work that the Audit Committee had been involved with on the deep dive reviews. So other than that, it's exactly the same as what we submitted earlier on.
Mm-hmm. That's great. No, I think it's important. I mean, we noted some of the ones that was helpful. I mean, the year we did see a couple of others as well. And I do think it all adds to this credibility of that there is a comprehensive overview in the governance of this council, with many ways in which it's looked at and many avenues to have a look at it. So I do think that is worth emphasising.
Yeah.
Good. The only point, any points colleagues want them to raise on the annual governance statement? This is a key part of the contribution to the oversight of the council's government. It is recognised by the government as a key requirement. Okay, I'm not getting any interest. The one point I want to raise and address is the issue about the commercial companies, which clearly, as we move into those being active and exposing council to risk, which is why we've now got them in the as separate items, as it were, in our accounts, is that we need to have an audit committee oversight of those as a separate exercise. So I just think it's something we need to address and think for a suitable reporting framework for those companies as they take off. Because they wouldn't naturally fall, correct me if I'm wrong, in any of the departmental overviews that we take.
How about, Chair, I agree with you completely, that needs to be that oversight. If I take it away as an action to speak with Dawn, who's also on the call here, and is also a director of at least one of the companies, aren't you, Dawn? I think it's the housing company. And we'll come back to you with some proposals, and it makes sense, doesn't it, that probably some draft accounts for them as well, or just an understanding of how they're operating.
Yeah.
Does that seem?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, someone needs to overview these. Is presumably there's a sort of management oversight through the executive of these companies, and we need to be reassured that there is such arrangements for oversight of them, and secondly that we've got some form of reporting in on risk, and as you say, maybe some regular draft accounts on occasion would be helpful. Michael, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have discussed with James about once the actual company accounts have been audited, that we bring a report back to Audit Committee. Obviously, it won't be for approval, but you'll get to see the audit opinions and the actual accounts. So that's one method of addressing some of that you just discussed.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, as you said, it's one dimension. I mean, I think we also need to look at other.
No, indeed.
I mean, it's not that I want to get too much of an overview. That's with the executive, but I do want reassurance that we've covered and understand the risks, particularly as commercial world is going to be quite a. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty in the commercial world one way or another over the next year, especially in this area. Great. Okay. So can we then approve formally the annual governance statement? Ask again for a show of hands. Great. I'm getting a unanimous one. Peter, have you recorded that?
Yes, I have, Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. And we now move on to the financial statements. Sorry, the update, finance update.
So I'll kick us off on this. Michael, would you be okay to share the slides on screen, or would it be easy if I do it? I'll just.
Just while that's happening, just so that I wanted a couple of things as part of this. One is obviously to keep us in what's quite a fast-moving situation over government support in particular, as well as our deeper understanding of the cost pressures. I think there are some real concerns now about long-term government support for local government, which have developed over the last month or so. We certainly want to have a look at the corporate risks that we face in light of the changes. What I've also asked for is a report on IT for a couple of reasons. One is IT is obviously one of the central corporate risks that we face, but I was particularly concerned that the outage, quite a serious outage we had during the summer, which undermined our systems, and obviously raises questions about how our risk, how do we react to that risk, and are our processes adequate? So I've asked Rob Miller to prepare something at the end of this update. So Ian, take it away on that.
Great stuff. So what members have got here, and I'm sure members have had a quick chance to flick through these slides, is quite a comprehensive slide deck, which I'll go through at pace, because some of these slides will be things which people will be familiar with, but I want to give you a sort of comprehensive slide deck here so that you had something to either take away, and if there are any further questions that you had after this meeting, for example, you know where to find us. So very quickly, I'm going to cover quick update on where we are in terms of the overall finances and some announcements, give you an update on the position as we know it in relation to the general fund, the housing revenue account, schools position, quick summary of where we are with the medium-term financial forecast, budget timetable, next steps. Also, pension fund, you've just heard from Lucy and the team the importance of their pension fund, and then move on to give a quick update on where we are with some corporate risks and developments in the audit space, particularly following the Redmond review. So just a few announcements that have been made, and actually even since these announcements were made, it was in the press today that possibly the Chancellor's now on the back of a potential second wave starting to come over the horizon, potentially moving the budget back from November into January. Obviously, that's just speculation at this point, but you could see that happening, couldn't you? So spending review, as we currently understand it, is going to be more than a 1-year spending review. It's going to be 3 years for revenue, 4 years for capital. And Hackney, particularly led by the work of Councillor Anderson and the Mayor, is looking to put in our own submission to that spending review, and we're working hard on that, and it's got to be in by the 24th of September, also linking up with London councils. Not surprisingly, also announcements around business rates, particularly a review of business rates, and also some updates on business rates revaluation. Members will recall that Hackney saw the largest increase in rateable value of any London borough the last time business rates were revalued. So again, we're looking to feed into that, with Councillor Nicholson particularly taking a lead on that. Just very quickly, measures that have been announced by the government of late. We received our third tranche of funding. Just this time it was a share of £500 million, totaling £3.5 million, bringing the total amounts of support we've received to just over £21 million. And we've also now submitted our 5th return in terms of the expenditure and losses of income to government that we've been filling in now since April. We were also busy working through the scheme for compensation for loss of income. The details of that only came out about 10 days ago. In actual what it is we've got to fill in, we have until the end of the month to fill that in, although all London boroughs are looking to try and get to position on that sooner, so that we can do a bit of quality assurance and just a bit of benchmarking to make sure people have captured all the things that they can capture. And by way of reminder, it's, as you can see there, how the scheme works. Councils bear the loss, a 5% loss compared to budgeted income, and then receive 75 pence in the pound of what's left of that as compensation. Not yet clear exactly how the audit regime of that will work, but this first return that we're having to fill in will cover the losses for the period April to July, and then expect maybe not quarterly returns after that, but certainly probably another 2 or 3 returns for the whole financial year. Not clear what will happen should there be a second wave or it go on into next financial year. Also, we've continued to see some guidance come out around how we treat collection fund deficits, which I'll come on to talk about in a bit more detail in a moment, as that's also one of the big drivers of our income challenges in terms of business rates, council tax. Council's also been working hard to spend the £427,000 of local authority emergency assistance grant for food and essential supplies. So turning on to the latest OFP forecast, and this is in relation to the general fund. So we've tried to sort of keep the split, if you like, as real as possible in terms of impacts on the budget that can be directly attributed to COVID and those that can't be. And what you can see there is the impact of COVID on the council's financial position. So the OFP that's going to Cabinet this month will forecast an overspend position of £64 million. That's broken down by just under £61 million in relation to COVID, and just over £3.6 million in relation to what we're terming non-COVID activity. We're obviously working through how we apply the government funding to get to a net overspend position of £13 million all in, 9.3 of which relates to COVID, 3.6 which relates to non-COVID. So that gives members a split there. And what we're working closely with officers on is how we can look to bridge the rest of that gap in the current financial year. Obviously, there's equally pressures on the housing revenue account, and only last week we got confirmation of the latest pay award proposals for officers, which was slightly above what we budgeted for in the budget we took to council in February. Very quick summary of where we are with the housing revenue accounts. Obviously, the accounts you've had this evening went through in detail the position on the housing revenue account. It gave you quite a lot of granularity. But what I've tried to do here is give you an initial forecast of where we are in terms of the housing revenue account going forwards. and also in the current financial year. We're forecasting a slight pressure at the moment in the current financial year, but the team's working hard to mitigate that, and also working up proposals going forwards in relation to balancing the budget for 21-22, and working closely with the Director of Housing to firm up some proposals that will then be obviously considered by members as part of the budget setting process for the housing revenue account. You can see the strategy given the drawdown that Michael referred to earlier on housing revenue account reserves. Due to some of the earlier pressures, we're looking to try and replenish some of those reserves in future years as part of the budget build strategy. Schools' position continues to be challenging when you get behind the headlines. So whilst a lot of the announcements that came out over the summer were of increases in schools funding, a lot of it is basically due to the fact that a lot of effectively grants that schools receive for things like teachers' pay, teachers' pension, employer contributions are being rolled into the main formula, and that obviously increases the size of the overall cake. What it doesn't mean is that schools are necessarily going to be better off by the headline increase. Also, we're told that councils will continue in the forthcoming financial year to manage the local schools formula. But beyond that, and we're expecting announcements possibly before the end of this calendar year, proposals for government to administer the formula centrally. I have to be very sceptical about their ability to do that. If you think how many schools there are across the country, nearly 25,000 schools, whether that would be a practical solution or whether they didn't want to do that, the question. Expected impact on Hackney schools, as we said earlier, the headline numbers probably certainly aren't going to be as aren't going to lead to the increases that people expected. And actually, school funding in Hackney is increasing by, we think, on a like-for-like basis, about £5 million, which on budgets of over £220 million in percentage terms isn't that much, is it? Impact for the council, and this committee more than any knows the impact on the council of issues with regards to schools funding, and that's predominantly in relation to high needs funding. This continues to be a challenge across the country, and something which has exercised not just directors of children's services and head teachers, but also treasurers and external auditors. So a lot of work's been done on the treatment of high needs deficits in council accounts. A number of boroughs, a number of local authorities across the country are recording now significant dedicated schools deficits, and the extent of which some deficits are now being reported is calling into question their overall financial resilience, and meaning that they're having to have some quite difficult discussions with their auditors. That isn't the case in Hackney, but it certainly is the case in a number of London boroughs now. And there's a lot of discussions going on with the DFE, with the Treasury Societies, to try and find a way of resolving this, because it's not going away. Turning to financial position then, and work that the team's been doing over the August period and into September, doing a lot of work to review and update our forecast position for the current financial year, as I've just outlined, making sure we've got that right, doing further review and challenge of the levels of agency spend, some real deep dives into some big cost pressures that are emerging. So a big driver of our cost pressures is in relation to PPE expenditure, and want to really be comfortable and make sure that the spend we're incurring on that is right, is necessary, and is justified, and that we've got all our processes in place on that. So a big piece of work's been done on that. In addition to that, I don't think any of us would want to go back to the position we had before COVID, where rough sleepers were on the street. But obviously now that we're into the next phase, we want to make sure that actually we build back better. And so with Councillor Renison, with the Head of Housing Needs and Benefits, a lot of work's going into making sure that we're building a service for the future, and making sure that all the positive interventions that took place over the sort of period where rough sleepers moved to hotels are sustained. So build back better, and we're at this stage putting together proposals to seek additional funding from the GLA, from government, for that service, in addition to putting on our own resources as well. Doing a lot of work on council tax, business rates, rents, really trying to beef up those forecasts for future years, taking into account things like better understanding of the end of furlough, better understanding of where people now are able to get out, they are paying, where that wasn't the case previously. reviewing again our parking estimates, what we're seeing on a like-for-like basis. I was looking at the figures for last week on parking as an example. On a like-for-like basis compared to last year, we actually took more in the week just gone in this period than we did a year ago, as an example. But obviously we did have at the start here a big period where we were just collecting no income at all, and that's not uncommon across the country, or certainly in London. Also doing further work to better understand and be clear on our assets and administrative costs, and also the impacts on our commercial property portfolio, which obviously with properties and premises being not able to trade, it's put a real strain on them being able to pay their rents. A lot of work's gone into that around deferrals, but I'm pleased to say that we are still seeing significant amounts of income on that coming in. And then equally, we're doing a lot of work on the capital programme as well, making sure there are schemes that if there are opportunities to just pause and reflect because of changes to what we want to do, when we're able to make adjustments for that. So turning very quickly then to our forecasts for the 21-22 position. Again, these figures will be, I'm sure, familiar to a number of people on this call. We've produced a range of forecast gaps. There's so much uncertainty in the system at the moment. Will there be a spending review? Will there be extra money for councils? Will there be more austerity? Will there be a second wave? And etc. etc. So we've come up with a range of forecasts, and currently in the process of having a further look at those again, and provide some updates on that in the next few weeks. But you can see the sort of scales and the range of challenges that are there. Interestingly, some of the drivers that exist between those different scenarios are, obviously yield on council tax and the cost pressures, and a whole range of things like that. Taking into account again some of those challenging structural impacts of COVID as well, again things that members are familiar with, and then leading us through to a revised medium-term forecast position, albeit in the absence of spending review, which shows potentially on a medium case scenario we could be looking for savings of up to 51 million pounds in the period up to 2023-24. Pension fund, again, as we covered in the accounts, really massive fluctuation in valuation levels, but we are now seeing, when we've had our latest updates, the fund recovering back to levels nearer that 90%, and it even has been as high as 93% a few weeks ago. So still a lot going on. Next steps: continuing the work with the Finance Scrutiny and Audit Group, and also with officers preparing options and proposals for members to consider alongside any announcements from government. Timetable, see there what's been going on in August, and obviously what we're doing in the current month as well. So I'll pause there, maybe share if that's okay, before I move on to corporate risk update and the Redmond review.
Yep, please. Thanks very much, Ian. Very clear. I mean, what I'm getting from that is that things have fundamentally remained through August in much the same state as they were beforehand. In other words, as we find out more, the same levels of uncertainty, and we're not getting wildly different estimates.
No, that's right. And I
think it's reassuring at one level that at least the targets are there, and we know what is likely to be that will change and create real issues for us. I think just before I ask members in, Rebecca, is there anything you want to say particularly about how you as the executive want to take forward the medium-term financial strategy issues?
Yeah, there's a bit of interference there, Chair, but I think I got the question. Yeah, sorry, Ian, I was just going to mute you. Yeah, you of course. Yeah, about how we take forward next steps. I'll just come in on a couple of things. So, firstly, just to echo the point made that our position is largely stable. I think there will be increasingly worrying headlines over coming weeks from lots of authorities, and I guess my sort of call out to members would be to bear in mind the presentation you've just seen. It is, yes, a substantial shortfall this year, but if you go back to earlier, we were talking about the audited position for the previous year end, it's manageable. We're not panicking. It's difficult, but it's under control. So bear that in mind as we see, difficult headlines going forwards. And obviously we'll be supporting and working with other authorities in that call for government funding. I think one thing that's is worth reflecting on as well is that we welcomed the government's commitment to help meet that income shortfall, which Ian set out earlier. I think it's useful when we look at that, though, to bear in mind that the government's been very clear that we have to share the costs within that. They're not meeting the entire loss. And I think as we go into things like the spending review, making the case that the government is asking us to help bear the burden and the financial cost of coronavirus, and not to any cut in local government funding on the back of that would be a betrayal of that trust and partnership approach, which we've done our best to honour. And Ian, I think, has touched on in previous updates, I'm not sure if we went into it tonight, Ian, that next year's forecast, that initial sort of 13 million shortfall or so, that came from what we were expecting from fair funding. So we're still, it's terrible to say, but one of our greatest risks is government decision on local government funding. So in the middle of a global pandemic, but that is one of the biggest threats that faces us, because we're not in a position to be able to manage that right now. And then, Nick's point on how we approach this going forward, and Ian, Ian, and I think Nick, you picked up as well, the huge amount of uncertainty, and it's a very unusual position, as it's a good combination tonight, having just gone through the audit process and then talk about this. We have a fantastic finance team at Hackney. Everything we do is very much evidence-based. We have very accurate financial forecasts, very tightly managed. The huge level of uncertainty in making any sort of forecast at this point is incredibly difficult. So we will continue the work that has been so helpful to working with audit and that scrutiny chairs group, and continue to take that forward. And Nick will pick up outside of this, scheduling the next one of those in. But likewise, we're talking with the Mayor and others about how we start to identify any areas that might require that sort of more deep dive work they've touched on previously. I'm getting a worrying sound from my laptop, so I hope you can still hear me. Start waving at me if my connection has gone. Or if my screen goes blank, my laptop's gone. So that'll be what the worrying sound is. So we'll look how to take that forward. I think the other thing, I don't know if Ian wants to come back in on this, is further tightening that figure for next year, because certainly politically we have to set a balanced budget, and the government has improved some of the rules for next year to help us know where we stand. I politically do not want to be setting a budget based on that forecast shortfall, because there are so many unknowns attached to it. So there is work now, which Ian and the team are undertaking, to work out what figures exactly we put into that budget for next year, and just to really make sure that we don't make any rash decisions going forwards. But obviously we'll be talking to members throughout that process.
Great, thanks very much, Rebecca. I think what you've just ended up with there is the very tricky line that we've got, because by the end of this year, by the end of the calendar year, we will need to have come to a view about a budget, an expected balanced budget. And as you say, we've got variations here from minus 13 to minus 52, and the implications of that are quite horrendous if you think about the savings that we'd have to make. So we've both got to be prepared for the worst, but without getting into a panic. I mean, what we don't want to have, and I'm sure you'd agree, is right at the last minute finding everything is going wrong and we're having to take panic decisions. And I think that's the job of the oversight group that you've talked about, that we can all be prepared and understand that. Colleagues, any questions before I ask Ian to go on either to Rebecca or to Ian on their contributions?
Chair, could I ask a question? With the worst case scenario, Ian, have you based that on the potential impact that we got from the first lockdown? Have you put in like another potential, lockdown and the impact that had? Because obviously people have started to go out and about and pay for parking and things like that. And also, you know, you do this update, you've done it for us, but does that go to like Cabinet regularly as well? So they see this finance update?
Thanks for that question, Councillor Lynch. No, so absolutely. What we've done in the range of forecasts is, particularly on the income lines, done a range of modelling scenarios. So whilst we haven't anticipated a second lockdown to the extent which we had previously, we have obviously taken a view about the sustainability and the resilience of, for example, the fall off in council tax income, the recovery of business rates, and furlough. Absolutely. So it's those aspects. Obviously, as we're getting more data in and more information as each month goes by, we're able to firm up those estimates, and that's the piece of work which we're continuing to do to sort of refine those forecasts a bit more. Certainly, Cabinet get the OFP each month, and I'm sure it's the first thing on their reading list when they get the Cabinet papers. We have also shared with them variations of this presentation at, for example, Cabinet HMT as well.
Yeah. So my second question is and it's in line with what Nick was saying. When obviously it is very unsettled at the moment, and like, you know, we've got to pay for some COVID wardens now, haven't we? I don't know where they're going to come from. But also you've obviously got some sort of a dashboard that will show when things are starting to, because like, as Nick explained, there's going to have to be some sort of trajectory that we are going to have to stop. We're going to have to start making decisions. So I wondered if that's been sort of in place as well, and sort of options of what might have to happen potentially. But I guess that's probably a little bit of Rebecca as well.
Very important issue, and I think obviously Ian, you've got a view, but I think Rebecca might want to come back in, because this moves into the whole political problems of making choices as well. Ian, do you want to just kick off with Anna's question?
So absolutely, throughout the whole process, we've always had different tools and levers in our toolbox, if you like, for things that we could look at should positions materially change, get worse. Government funding, for example, may not have come through to the level it had. Certainly, if we go back to when we had those first and second announcements, we waited a long time, didn't we, for the compensation scheme for income. And some of those are referenced in the slides around, we would obviously look to slow down and rephase the capital programme, particularly where there's revenue contributions to it. There's also levers we have around our reliance in a number of areas on high levels of agency spend. So there are a whole range of levers we could look at, including investments into some new commitments as part of the budget process. But at this point, we haven't had to pull any of those levers in any significant way.
Great. Rebecca, do you want to add anything? Not compulsory, just if you had anything more.
Well, just, I mean, I suppose at the risk of sounding like a broken record, we've obviously established this working group with audit and scrutiny chairs, and we'll keep that going. And I think the intention was sort of Ian and the team have got the work at the moment about tightening those numbers. So we've got that clear set parameters to work within. And then the intention was, I think, as we start to go through that process with that working group, that you will sort of highlight where you feel we need to take off particular areas to do some more focused work, whether it's with scrutiny or with others. We will be working to the normal budget schedule, obviously, and actually, even though we've all been in a slightly strange contradictory position that we've probably all talked about the budget far more than we do in normal years, but actually, if you think about it, it would probably be quite a bit further on in terms of a lot of the engagement and talking to members and that side of it, with a normal process. But again, just the scale of the unknowns doesn't mean we can take that forward at this stage. So I think the best we can commit to is being as open with members as we possibly can, sharing the latest information as we have it, and working through this together, really.
Yeah, thanks for. I mean, just to endorse that openness, because I've been delighted the way that has happened, because I do think we are seriously all in this together in quite an important way, and it's very important that we understand from our own perspectives, different perspectives, the risks. So welcome that. I see Harvey Odds has joined us. Welcome, Harvey. I hope you're well. Any points you want to raise from the various?
Well, and I'm sorry I'm late, and I came in right towards the end, so I don't think there's anything I need to say at this point.
No, well, you're welcome as ever. Great. Okay. Any other points that colleagues want to ask of Ian or Rebecca on this crucial phase? Well, as I say, we'll have another update at the next audit meeting, and I anticipate by then we will have had a further meeting of the audit and scrutiny get together, and we can begin to see the timetable for addressing the issues Rebecca's talked about. Great stuff. Okay, Ian, do you want to take us through the next bit of your presentation then, please?
Certainly, Chair. So the next two sections of the presentation, and Rob's also now joined us as well, is just a quick update on corporate risks, given it's a while since we had our last meeting, and then a quick overview of changes in the audit space around the Redmond review. So I'm mindful you've heard a lot from me this evening, so I'll go through these at pace if that's okay. So firstly, we've got a quick summary of the current corporate risks with their respective RAG scores, and you can see there how that's shaping up. Obviously, the big new one is the pandemic, economic downturns, but also the threat of that second wave. We've also brought in here some of the headline corporate risks in summary, so you can see there that exactly the second wave is a real headline corporate risk for us, as is economic downturn, impact on the economy, therefore impact on the ability of either government or local taxpayers to fund public services that they rely upon. You can also see that we mustn't forget, the Brexit is still ongoing. Seems a lifetime that's all we used to talk about, but you can see there that obviously, and we've seen in the press over the last few days, that the temperature in terms of Brexit is heating up, and that's obviously a potential further risk that exists, not just to the country but also to local councils, how they operate going forwards. Other high scoring red risks still continue to be some of our old favourites. SEND continues to be high on the list just because it hasn't yet really been resolved at a national level in terms of funding, and I still suspect that there will be an outcome from schools having been closed for significant periods of time, children falling behind with learning, that will in the end find its way through to us through other means in terms of piling on extra costs, be it through additional numbers in SEND, be it through pressures in our temporary accommodation housing lists, and then obviously we've got the ongoing challenges from universal credit with the fall off of furlough. You also asked for a quick update on internal controls assurance, and again you can see here how we've responded swiftly to deliver services, provide that existing help in new ways since the start of the pandemic, and Rob will cover a bit of this in his presentation as well, so I won't sort of steal his thunder there. Again, you can see how services have looked to manage some of those changes, but also the work that internal audit did. And I'm particularly pleased with the extent to which Mark Sheffield was able to redeploy a number of his auditors and the investigators into key areas as part of the pandemic response. And a number worked not only in the Borough Emergency Command Centre, but they also worked extremely closely with people in the business grants assessment teams, administering payments, investigating concerns as they arose, and actually enabled us to pay out significant sums of money in a really timely fashion, which was obviously necessary to enable those businesses to continue, but also in a safe fashion from the taxpayer's perspective as well. And Michael and his team have also been working closely with the Regen team in relation to the discretionary business support scheme that's due to come to conclusion at the end of this month. So governance arrangements remain in place, which we all know. I think we had one of the first committees, didn't we? The April Audit Committee. It seems a lifetime ago now, and whilst some processes at year end were delayed, we've still managed to get to where we are here. And risk management remains vitally important during this period of change, with risks continuously reviewed, updated, and continuously reviewed and reported to Audit Committee. I'll pause there, maybe, Chair, before moving on to the Redmond review, if that's okay.
Yep, no, it's fine. Any questions on Ian's corporate risk overview? Yeah, Claire, go ahead.
Thank you for your detailed report, Ian. I just wanted to know whether you could talk a little bit about, the big risk of Brexit, which of course you've alluded to, which we've taken our eyes off to a certain extent, which is, as you mentioned, getting much more pressing in national coverage now. Just in terms of, the thinking that the council is doing, given the knowledge that you have currently.
Certainly. I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say that probably, a year ago, maybe not, Brexit was certainly something which all local authorities were doing extensive planning for, and we did an awful lot of work in the preparation for that to make sure for things like, on it from an internal perspective, any members of staff who might have been concerned about their status, their residency status, we were looking to support them, and we were one of the first authorities to say that we would pay for people to do the necessary citizenship type support, and we set, and the registrar's team did a fantastic job in relation to that. Obviously, what at the moment with such a focus on COVID, we are and have been continually dusting down all the preparations that we made. What's not entirely clear, if I'm honest, is exactly what government needs local authorities to do over and above what we're doing with COVID in relation to Brexit. But I do expect over the coming months more information to come out from places like MHCLG, from central government, in relation to any preparations local authorities need to make. I think it's probably an advantage that we had made preparations before, and all we're making sure we're doing as a management team is keeping abreast of any external developments, but also making sure locally we've put in the arrangements we'd already put in place are continued, updated and refreshed.
Thank you, Ian. Can I just ask, have we been able to carry on those citizenship program, supporting the kind of settlement schemes? Because I thought it had been put on hold for a little while, but has it been able to restart again?
So registrars is back up and operating. I saw a number of things taking place in the town hall only last week. I'd have to go away and just double check on that exact point. Sorry, Councillor, I can't recall offhand, but I know I'll be able to get an answer to that very quickly from Matt and his team.
Great, thanks very much, Claire. Any other member questions to Ian? Okay, Ian, let's go with the Redmond report then.
So I was going to propose, Chair, that we probably would cover this maybe in a bit more detail at our next meeting, in terms of, I think 2.5 slides probably isn't quite justice for it, but we were mindful of quite a long agenda tonight and already quite a few slideshows. But just for members' awareness, the Redmond review, which was the independent review of local authority external audit arrangements and the transparency of financial reporting, announced its findings last week. And the key findings of this are as follows, and they'll not be a surprise to, I think, anyone on this call. There are concerns about the resilience of the external audit market under current arrangements, perceived imbalance between price and the required quality of the audit, i.e. the expectations that are placed on auditors as well, and we've talked about some of those earlier this evening. Tony's proposing to create a new regulatory body, the Office of Local Audit Regulation, but he's very clear when he speaks that is not to recreate the Audit Commission. He feels this, though, should be established to coordinate external audit, procurement, contract management, regulation and oversight. Also feels consideration should be given to including an independent member on the Audit Committee to help ensure that the necessary expertise, knowledge and exists in relation to reports. I think that's something we have talked about for many years on this committee, not for a while, but I do recall back in the days of use of resources assessments under the best value regime, it was something which good few audit committees in its generations ago did debate. But they also feel the annual external audit report should be presented to full council by the external auditors. And there was also recognition that maybe the shift of the deadline to the 31st of July was a bridge too far, given the challenges around having an active audit market. So the proposals there are for the reported deadline to be 30th September. And also proposed to bring in what's called a new simplified statement of service information and costs to be prepared, to try and facilitate some degree of comparison between the council's annual budget and council tax arrangements. ultimately, though, what he isn't able to recommend is that the accounts themselves get simplified, and this is obviously something which we'd all welcome and support, but is a continuing, ongoing piece of work which certainly CIPFA are struggling a bit with, because of the need for accounts to ultimately then comply with a whole range of other requirements that exist. So that's a very quick overview of the Redmond review. I'm sure members have had a copy of the link of it. If they haven't, please let me know. I can get that sent out, but we'll do a more detailed paper for the next audit committee.
I think that would be helpful. I think this is more just to alert people the main issues involved, because it does and will have an impact on how the council runs its whole audit function, as well as people who support it. So unless anyone's got any queries, let's reserve the discussion, proper fuller discussion, for a next meeting. Great. Okay, so final substantive item on is the IT report, and I can see Rob is on the line. You want to identify yourself, Rob, and just do two things. As I said before, he was particularly anxious that we did understand in terms of internal counsel without the whole interaction with our public, and it becomes one of the most important strategic issues in this issue. And obviously the fact that our system went down for a period, I'd like to ask us to have a brief review and what happened and what we can do. Yeah, do you want to take your one off?
Yes, I've done that, Chair. I've taken down the screen, and yeah.
Rob, are you there?
I am. Yes. Can you hear and see me? Okay. Right. Cool. Yeah. Sorry. I think Councillor Sharman's internet connection.
Yeah, we can.
I think, Councillor Sharman, that your internet connection might be having some difficulties. Ian, can you see me? Okay. And can you see the slide?
Brilliant.
That's great. Cool. So, hello everybody. My name is Rob Miller. I'm Director of Customer Services and ICT. I've got a two-part update here. The first part will give an overview of the key areas that the ICT and digital teams have been working on through the COVID-19 response. And then I also, as Councillor Sharman highlighted, wanted to share a bit more information about the recent issues that we had over August. So just to quickly go through that. So starting with COVID-19, there were three kind of key areas in which our team have been part of the response. So firstly, in terms of supporting services themselves with the technology and data skills that they need to respond to the pandemic. Secondly, directly involved with support for our residents, which has included helping to set up and deliver new services which they've needed throughout lockdown and the months that have followed the beginning of the easing of the lockdown controls, and also adaptations within the service itself and how we've changed the way in which we're working to respond to the challenges. So some headlines. This isn't exhaustive, but this is to give you a flavour of what the team have been doing. So very, very rapidly, we were supporting the move from office-based colleagues to home-based working. So we started our work on that before the lockdown was formally introduced. And that included, one of the photos there is reconditioning several hundred old laptops which we had retired and were due to be disposing, so that they could be used for staff who didn't have equipment at home. So we were able very quickly to mobilise people so that they could work from home, and we had a lot of support so that people could get set up if they hadn't worked from home before. We've also done a lot of work with data, so I'll share these slides with you afterwards. The link there takes you to a summary pack that we did early on in COVID, which was designed to try and help colleagues across the council and partners understand where needs might arise from the pandemic. So one of the screenshots there is how we've managed to use a range of different council data sets to help services understand, in this case, for example, where there are people over 70 living alone who might need additional help and support. And as we're seeing here, we also work really closely with our colleagues in the governance teams and the committee teams, and with members and officers to help set up virtual meetings, which have been very successful. And the link there takes you to a write-up that one of the team did with some of the learning points from that. Moving on, our support for residents. So the team have been working directly as part of the partnership response to the needs in the borough. So the Find Support Services map built on work we were doing already to help bring together information about voluntary services and other support that people could find in the borough. And we were able to turn that into an online tool there, which people could use to find the services which best met their needs in their locality. So that's been extremely rapid development, building on work already in progress, and very well received. The support to get food to people who are isolating at home and unable to get food for other means. Our team have been working really closely with colleagues from a wide range of services to make that happen. I think at the final count, the council directly delivered about 22,000 parcels of food, and we know that our partners in the voluntary sector as well made an heroic effort to get food out. And we know that other community groups were really important in making sure that different cultural needs were met as well. So that was a really important effort for the team, and we worked really closely with lots of other people there. And the photo at the top there is some of the team delivering some of the 1,500 laptops which the Department for Education provided as part of their scheme for disadvantaged children and young people to help them access online learning. And we helped make sure that that equipment was quickly received from DFE and out to schools really fast. And also working with colleagues in social care so that children in care who were allocated with laptops got those devices as quickly as possible. Deep dive into a couple of areas there. So our support for vulnerable residents has, we've developed a very kind of a quick tool which helps people find contact agents to find the information that will give advice to people needing help. So this wasn't just about food, it was a much wider set of needs. So people in financial difficulties, people with care and mental health support needs. So the work around there built on the strengths-based approach that colleagues in adult services have been using. And we've been able to use the fact that we've been working on that support service data to make sure that we can make it really easy for a contact agent to give people advice they need. And again, partnership working is really important. So we know that there have been people who've had, for example, need for food, but they need culturally appropriate food. This is a screen grab of how we've made it easy for people to filter down local community support offers to find the support which best meets their needs. So that's again using data resources that were developed through the Find Support Services work and making that available to contact agents so they can provide quick and accurate information for people. And then the third area in terms of the service adaptation itself, so we rapidly moved to suspend less time critical projects. All of them were important to someone. And that included pausing work on manifesto commitments, but we made sure we were prioritising our capacity to the most urgent work. The team moved into a very sort of rapid management approach, so we were using daily meetings to make sure that there was real focus and the team were able to adapt to changing events. For example, I think it was a Friday afternoon, we were being told that we would need to provide the food for shielding people. The guidance changed a number of times over the weekend. By the next week, we had deliveries going out. Again, working in partnership with the voluntary sector, we had to respond to a really rapidly changing situation. We moved more of our systems to direct access over the web. I'll talk to that in a minute, but making it easier for people to get to the tools they needed without increasing the demand on the My Office service, the virtual desktop. And we also took a number of members of our teams and put them into other parts of the response. So we have members of the IT team working in the Borough Emergency Control Centre as part of the response management process, helping set up the redeployment scheme to make sure that staff were able to be directed to the areas which needed the most. The work continues. We're acutely aware, as Ian said, of second waves and the long-term effects. So some examples of what we're doing here. We're continuing to work with services to help them adapt their service models. So for example, in libraries, looking at kind of making the public access computing service available as quickly as we can. We're working with colleagues in public health and customer services for the introduction of local contact tracing to augment NHS Test and Trace and help make sure that more of the contacts they identify we're in touch and giving the right advice. We're working really hard with many colleagues in different areas to continue the work to tackle digital exclusion. So the laptops and DFE were only part of it. They're a really important campaign at the moment, asking residents in the borough to donate used IT equipment so that we can recondition it and make it available to children and young people, and a range of other things we're doing on digital skills. And we know that with the impact of COVID, the digital world has become even more important than it was before. There's more work around how we continue to develop online council meetings and support the democratic processes. And looking in the medium term, we're clear that there's going to be an ongoing need for many of our staff to work from home over a protracted period of time. So we're working closely with colleagues to provide more support to those people at home. So, for example, many people are working on laptops where actually they need a proper workstation. So we're shipping equipment out to them. We're helping with the reconfiguration of the council's offices so that we can welcome more staff into the office while still applying COVID secure arrangements. And services like our print and post teams are working together to make it easier for staff to do things like issuing letters to residents without needing to be in the office. There's a wide range of work we're doing there. Councillor Sharman, would you like me to pause on COVID or go straight into the disaster recovery and take questions at the end?
Why don't we just see any points people want to raise on the, I think, very impressive response there's been by IT to this, along with colleagues in many other areas, but IT has been so important to keep us linked that I think it has a special place. Yes, Anna, you wanted to come in. You're on mute.
Sorry, I've got one of these fancy new Apple mices and it keeps blocking. Rob, I just have to say, I think this is a wonderful presentation, and I think, I think everyone, and I've used the terms back office. You guys aren't back office. You're in there in the trenches with the work that your teams have done to support COVID. And I just think I'd just like to commend that you definitely have shown a holistic approach to the responses to COVID. So I just think it's wonderful what you've done, and it really goes to show how your team and department have had to adapt so quickly. And I've said this before, Rob, I've said this before, but we were so lucky as a council that you had the vision to get us to a place where we were much further ahead in being able to manage a lot of the changes that were needed in terms of having the Google system in place. So just thank you so much, Rob, and do pass our congratulations on to your teams, because it's lovely. And I know that my mum got one of the calls from one of your teams as well. So thank you. Thank you very much.
The question, I think that was just a
no, it is. I think it's important, though. I think it's good for members to commend the work. Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, Rob, any points you want to come back?
Yeah, so I really appreciate that. I'll be delighted to pass that feedback to the team. They'll be really pleased to hear that as well. I think they find it really motivating when their impact is noticed like that. Councillor Sharman, your point about the partnership work, I think, is really important. I think all of these things have been achieved through that kind of collaboration across different staff from different areas. And we've been sort of one part of a cog in a much bigger machine, but it's been, I've personally been really impressed with how the whole Hackney team has pulled together. And the other thing is, I think it's really shown the value of many of the in-house services. So we're able to send people off to work on different teams and do things well outside what their normal work is without needing to have a contract conversation about the specification. So that allowed us to respond much more rapidly.
I can't but agree with that. I can't anything but agree with that. I think the more we have strategic capability in-house, this has shown how important that is. So thanks for that point. Okay, if there are no other points, Patrick, yes, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, hello. I wanted to ask about the customer service centre and the present status of the centre in terms of seeing residents face to face, if that's as and when that might happen, and what sort of planning is going into that at this point, if any.
Thanks for that. Yeah, important question. Rob, you've got part of the answer. I suspect not all of it, though.
Well, and I'm now responsible for it. So yes.
Oh, right, you are the right person.
So we've reopened face-to-face contact in the Hackney Service Centre. The first step of that was registrars, which we did some time ago, because, for example, registrations of birth by law have to be done in person. So that allowed us to plan COVID-safe arrangements in there. You know, for example, things like perspex screens, so that people are safe and feel safe. Recently, I think it's about 2 weeks ago, we've now opened it for people who are either booking to be seen, or if they present without a booking, then we will try and facilitate support for them and arrange a booking if necessary. If you visit the service centre, you'll see that we've basically colour-coded different areas of the main atrium for different services, and we've got a one-way system in place there. Temperature checks when people arrive. We'll provide a face covering if people haven't brought one with them. And that seems to be going well. I took a walk around last week, and the team seem confident what they're doing, and residents are getting the services they need. There are other places where people get face-to-face service, and we're working with those different services to see how we can use the service centre as a safe place to deliver other face-to-face services as well, because it's got the space and the flow of people around the building makes it relatively easy for us to make that possible in a COVID safe way.
Great, thanks for that. Patrick, anything you want to add to that? No? Okay, great. Harvey, you wanted to come in, yeah? Come in.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to agree with everything that Councillor Lynch said, just to back it up, and with the exception of her last point. Having worked with Excel since it took over from SuperCalc as being the best spreadsheet on the market, and knowing a lot of tips and tricks and quick cuts, it's a long route to go to the Google suite from, I mean, much as I hate Microsoft, being a former Novell person, and Word Perfect, it's still something that I've used for many years, and I'm sure I'm not alone. And the migration has been very difficult, I must admit, but we're getting there, and thank you for all your support in it.
Great, thanks very much, Harvey.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah. Good, all right, thanks for that. Well, just a quick one, Rob. How many people are actually using the centre on a daily basis now? Has there, are people taking to it and in the way that we'd hoped or expected?
It varies. I don't have exact figures to hand. I think I saw in the sort of 20-30 minutes when I walked around, I think it was Thursday last week, I lose track of time and space. I think I saw 10 to 20 residents in that time. Certainly we've had a lot of people coming in as we caught up with the backlog of birth registrations. So there was a lot of flow of people coming in with newborns so they could get those registered over the previous couple of months.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, well, there's a unanimous point from the Audit Committee to congratulate you and your staff on that, so do pass that on for us. But we did run into a problem.
So yeah, we'll now move on to the more challenging part of the update. So so colleagues will be aware that over August we had an especially challenging month. What I've done here is to try to give you a little bit of information about what happened behind that, explain the context for that a little, and explain what we're doing about it next. It's still a work in progress, and we have further follow-up work we're taking place as well. And I'll be really happy to come back to the committee and provide more detail as that investigation work and follow-up action takes place. So to give a brief overview of that. So right at the end of July, overnight, we had some unplanned and unnotified work by our network provider took place. The impact of that was that some of our new data storage infrastructure in the data center that we're migrating to had a catastrophic failure. The consequence of that was that internally hosted systems were unavailable. So I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in a minute. This was part of planned work, so this wasn't equipment that had sort of fallen out of repair and hadn't been invested in. This was part of a new transition to a new data center. The cause was not the new data center, but it had a sort of a ripple effect across our internal infrastructure. Just to give you a quick drawing, So we have two data centers, the old one and the one we're moving to. So fairly soon, although slightly slower, the bottom left-hand cloud will no longer be there. Connecting each of those, we have two normal lines. That gives us resilience and is used for users to access their systems. So if you are working in the main council campus and the one of the lines to our data center goes down, the other line will provide you access to the systems you need. We also have a single high capacity line to each data center, which is normally used for overnight backups when a lot of data needs to go down the line and the standard size link wouldn't be fast enough to back up all of our systems. In the purpose of the migration, that's also being used to move systems from the old data centers to the new. So what happened was it's the high capacity line into the new data center which was affected by the outage. We don't have a resilient high capacity line because they're extremely expensive and they're not used for normal operations. They're part of the backup process. So in normal circumstances, if there was a failure, or even now if that line went down, it can set by design, it should slow the migration down. It should not have had the effect it did. In terms of impacts, I've tried to sort of describe the different types of systems here. So if we start at the top, where we've already moved to modern cloud-based technology such as G Suite, but also the council internet and intranet websites and a number of other systems like our phone system, then there was no impact at all. Those sort of exist in the internet. We access them as if they were a normal website and they don't have any dependencies on our internal infrastructure. That is our strategic direction of travel for many reasons, and resilience is part of that. Then we have some systems which are externally hosted. So they're managed by different suppliers, but those have variable levels of dependency on our internal infrastructure. So the ones which have the most dependency are ones where systems are linked together in some of the ways that we would have joined things up in the past, and also where they use our desktop service, so where they're more traditional desktop type applications. And then the legacy systems which we are working to retire, but there are many of them and it's not a trivial piece of work, are the ones where we had the greatest impact. So those are ones where we manage the infrastructure, where they're sat in our data center, and where they rely on the systems that we manage. Those tend to be using kind of older styles of technology, albeit modern versions of it, but there's also tend to be systems where there are more interconnections between things. So there are more things dependent on one another. In terms of how we managed the incident, so again, this was something where we were able to draw on a wide range of skills in the teams. So the bulk of the work landed on our platform teams who look after the infrastructure, the applications and support our users, but they were supported by our delivery team. So we took people away from project work to help with the coordination of the recovery, and our relationship management team, because the scale of the impact made it really important that we had a kind of an effective link in with colleagues in other services. And I have to commend my colleagues in services across the council. I've worked in other councils where relatively trivial things led to extremely angry emails. I'm surprised by how supportive and how much forbearance colleagues have had here, and how effectively they've worked to use their own continuity plans and allowed us to focus on recovering the incident. Then my head of platform, Henry Lewis, was the senior leader responsible for the recovery, and then working with me. And obviously, it won't surprise you to know that Ian was keeping a beady eye on progress and very keen to make sure that he was confident that we were doing the right things. Where are we now? So most of the key systems were recovered within the first 2 weeks. Many of them were recovered more quickly than that. Some of them, planning is a good example of that. The system is back, but it's still performing at a speed which is not adequate for those teams. So teams in planning, for example, are having to work around a very poor performing system, which the technical teams are working really hard to try and understand what's causing that, and to get that back to a normal level of performance. Our immediate focus was on operational systems. So we're still working to recover test and development systems. So those are important to project teams, for example, or teams who are testing out new work before it goes live. So we won't be finished until we have those done. So we think that's likely to run into October until everything is back to a state where we're happy to say it's done. And we've also paused our migration to the new data center so that we can focus on the recovery of systems, and so that we can take a proper stock of, we need to understand the cause, the affected piece of equipment, is still Microsoft, whose software we use, and HP, whose hardware it's based on, have not yet been able to understand exactly what we need to do to move it into a normal working state. So we're not able to move on with our data center migration yet until we've completed that. In terms of next steps, our priority at the moment is recovery. And like I said, that will be done when all systems are back, not only the operational ones, but also the ones that teams need to test work. We've commissioned an external partner to lead the lessons learned review. We want that to be a proper opportunity to reflect on not just what caused it, but also how might we have responded differently, what opportunities do we have to learn from that. We're working with the business continuity team in emergency planning to support services in reviewing their business continuity plans. Like I say, colleagues have been really impressive in how they've responded to this and continue to deliver their services, especially given they've already been dealing with COVID. We'd already agreed that we would look at our business continuity plans in light of COVID and say, what can we learn? How can we continue to improve? We were well served by them, but we've got opportunities to learn. So we'll include the IT outage as part of that. And we'll also look at the work plans within IT for how we implement lessons learned. So like I say, underlying it is a technical issue, but we've learned areas in terms of how we coordinate our work, the skills we need, and also things we need to reflect on in terms of can we move faster in terms of moving to cloud-based services, for example? Are there things we need to do in terms of understanding some of the long-standing and complex integrations between systems, which would help us recover faster?
Great, thanks, Rob. Very, very comprehensive response. Any questions from colleagues on Rob's report? Harvey.
Again, it's not a question. It's congratulations on the way you handled it. Having been involved in disaster recovery, particularly in April 1993, when the IRA Bishopsgate bomb went off, I was responsible for a branch of a British merchant bank, which for those of you who know the banking system will know who it is, because there's only one British merchant bank these days. I was responsible for one of their divisions, which was just off Bishopsgate, and the previous weekend on the Sunday I had installed a new file server there with a 2 gigabyte hard disk and a 4 gigabyte tape backup, which in 1993 was quite state of the art. And their chairman, after the bomb went off, was very, very pleased, because it went off on the Saturday. On the Monday morning, their staff came into a new site which somebody else had lent them, and they were all up and running. Partly because the police allowed us in to the old site to retrieve their file server, which was an old compact, and I'd advised them to go for these compacts because they were resilient. And although the ceiling had collapsed on it, the machine itself had survived. But in addition to that, we had their backup server in our office, which was a completely different part of London, and one of their executives brought in the tapes, which we started to restore whilst I was getting the old server back up, and we found it was working. He then proceeded to tell me that a few months beforehand, he'd had a letter from the Bank of England asking him about their disaster recovery procedures. And as part of his reply, he told them that one of his senior executives took the backup tapes home at night and they recycled them, to which the Bank of England replied, "Oh, we think that's dangerous. You ought to have them in a secure facility." So he wrote back and says, "I don't think there's anything safer than one of my executives who cares taking it off-site out of London and keeping it there until it's needed." And he was very pleased because one of their competitor banks, which was literally around the corner from them, did exactly what the Bank of England had suggested and had the tapes picked up and stored in a secure facility. The only problem was the secure facility was on Bishopsgate. So he,
interesting story.
Telling them about it. The reason I tell the story is because it's not what the disaster is, it's how you react to it. The blue sky thinking and the recovery, which I think you've handled extremely well.
Great, thanks for that. I mean, I do think that that final point you made is the crucial one, and why the Audit Committee is particularly anxious to know that we do have the proper facilities, both in terms of protecting ourselves, but in terms of being able to react appropriately. And certainly concur with everybody saying that we've done very well there. But I do want to make sure we learn the lessons in terms of protecting ourselves. So, what I'd suggest, if there are no other questions, that Rob, once you've been through this review, that we get a full report on the lessons learned side of it. We've got the background now, but it's really what we learn from it in terms of overseeing absolutely crucial systems. Great. Okay. Any other points people want to raise? Good. Okay. Well, thanks again to all colleagues for those reports. And let's move on just to a final quick item, because I think this is just more just to record the next deep dive, the timetable on that. Ian, do you just want to take us through that?
Thank you, Chair. I think we covered this at our last meeting in terms of the spirit of it, and what you've got before you here this evening, members, is just a report really just reinforcing that. Our intention to undertake the next deep dive being into just sort of capital budget monitoring, that side of things, which certainly myself, Michael, really welcome. I think it's, and I hope it will be as successful as the other deep dives that we've done over the last few years.
Right, and we've got, you're going to set up some fairly early meetings.
Yes, Joe's working with the officers identified here in terms of from the departments to get those in the diary. I think with holidays, some of them it's just been difficult nailing down dates that worked with your availabilities, diaries, etc. But I think she's getting there now, so hopefully they'll come out the next day or so.
Great. Well, do ask colleagues to join that deep dive meetings when they get going. Great stuff. Any other business? Yes, Claire, go ahead.
Thanks, Council Chair. Sorry, should I say? I'd just like to ask: is there any follow-on on our last deep dive? How's that report being treated by the council currently? Good
question. Ian, do you want to pick up on that?
So, gosh, I'm trying to remind myself what that was. This was into insourcing, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yes. So, obviously, Councillor Renaissance on the call as well. Yes, absolutely. The council has, taken on board all the things within that report. And in addition to that, I'd expect over the coming months to see a number of options coming forwards to probably be CPC to potentially insource a number of council services where we've undertaken the necessary work and feel that's the most appropriate course of action.
Do you want to update?
Yeah, I can add to that. There's a whole bundle of work basically ready to go, and just like many things, COVID has meant that we've had to focus on the response there. But yeah, hopefully get some stuff scheduled with members over the autumn, and we'll be taking it forward.
Great. I mean, I do think it was what we found. Where we were reassured that we had in the council a proper process for looking and reviewing both whether things should come in-house and how that's done. So I think we can be reassured the exercise you're going through, Rebecca, will be in a proper form. Though obviously we'd like to keep an eye on how that develops. I do think the point Rob making about how important some of this control over core services has really been reinforced, not only by COVID, but by the whole way in which the IT function has worked and kept and been resilient. I would hate to have been trying to manage a nest of outsourced contracts in our core services right now. So thanks for that. Any other business that members want to raise?
Chair, if I may, there's just one matter I'd like to draw to members' attention. It's just to put on record my thanks and appreciation to Michael, who this will be his last audit committee as Director of Financial Management. Michael's worked with me now for over a decade. I've worked very closely in some of the most challenging financial times. And gosh, I thought when we had austerity in 2010 that started, that was going to be challenging. Little did we know what would happen over the last 6 months. But I'd just like to place on record, my thanks to the support Michael's given me as Treasurer, Section 151 officer over many years, and wish him all the very best for the future. I'm sure members of this committee would want to echo those. There will be an opportunity, I'm sure, at some point to say best wishes, hopefully in person and hopefully over a glass or two of something that's stronger than water. But I didn't want to let this evening go without putting that on record. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think very, very helpful. My problem was I launched into a great kind of tribute to Michael last time. I was all, he was about to leave, and I went into the thing. Bloody hell, he turned up again. And I understand we may be seeing Michael in another form too. So
absolutely, yes, and he's going to cover Rachel's maternity leave on the pension side. So really pleased about that.
Yeah, no, delighted to see it. Well, then I will say, given that this is your last formal meeting of the Audit Committee, I will absolutely endorse what Ian said. We've been very well served by you and your efforts, and you've built up a lot of confidence in this committee, your handling of both things on the ground, but how you've interacted with members too. So thanks again for a real distinguished contribution to the council. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks. There's a good team beneath me, so I think that service will continue through after I'm gone. So yeah, definitely.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm getting nods all round from people, so great. Good. All right. With that, thanks very much indeed. And we have another of our regular meetings in October. And I'm not sure. I'd be intrigued to know whether we will finally be anywhere clear about actually meeting in person by then. But let's hope it's not too long before we. But thanks again for everyone's contribution. Appreciate it, and thanks, Lucy, for what you've done. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. Bye.